This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, promoting the free enterprise system to enhance economic competitiveness. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond. We're in Roanoke and are delighted to have three members of the House of Delegates here today. Delegate Charles Poindexter, thanks for being here. Delegate Onzlee Ware, Delegate Joseph Yost. Thank each of you. We want to have you inform our viewers some about what you see coming up in the 2013 session, the biggest opportunity or the biggest challenge or problem. So Charles, let's start with you.
Okay, David. Wow. I suspect that the election results will drive some of the legislation, but the issues, a lot of the issues that Virginia faces are external issues coming out of Washington, D.C. Undoubtedly, the budget will be the largest issue that we address this year. While we will be emphasizing jobs and economic development, our revenue is sort of level at best. The governor's already asking his agencies to take a look at a 3 or 4% cut. So it promises to be a tweaking year on the 2-year budget that we passed last year. There's some other interesting items and some of the drivers on us, the Medicaid expansion, establishment of exchanges. Transportation's always an issue. We had a conference on K-12 education a couple of months ago. I anticipate significant K-12 reform in addition to what we've done in the past. The Port of Virginia will be a major discussion topic as we have received a PPTA proposal on that, and right now there's a lot of, I guess I'd say, lack of information on both sides and comparing apples to oranges, so I'll be surprised if we don't take some time to deal with that.
Onzlee?
Well, I think Charles took all the goodies, but I would agree with him. We have a smorgasbord of things that we need to deal with, but most importantly, Charles and I, both on appropriations, so we'll see a lot of trying to balance the budget. As you know, in Virginia, we have a constitutional amendment. We have to. And as he said, the sequestration policies, if they don't hurry up and do something, will probably come in effect. And even if they do something, I still think that it'll have some type of impact on Virginia. And our, we have some of the major ports, and we do quite a bit of procurements from defense spending. So Northern Virginia could see a difference in their economy. And so we really need to sit down and thoroughly think it through. But I hope what we do from the election is understand that people expect us to go down there and achieve some results. And they expect us to work together. And I hope the good thing out of the election is, people have, I think, said loud and clear, they want results, and they want us to address all the problems that Charles has said. I'm looking forward to education reform. There's stuff in there I like that I think we need to at least try. Privatization of the ports is another issue. And of course, I've been intimately involved with the uranium issue, and so that will probably be a driver. I think in a short session, we have a lot on our plate to deal with.
46 scheduled days. Delegate Yost, what are you seeing?
Well, I think, Delegate Poindexter and Delegate Ware have pretty much summed it all up. There are some unique issues that I think we will be dealing with. They both mentioned sequestration. What a lot of people don't realize when we talk about sequestration, everybody thinks of it in terms of defense cuts, but there's defense and non-defense cuts that will be taking place. You know, our public schools here in Virginia do get a certain amount of money from the federal government, and I know at least all the schools in my district, and I'm pretty certain the ones across the state, have been preparing in 10% cuts from their federal funding. And for localities like Montgomery County and City of Radford and Giles, you're talking about $100,000 up to $400,000 in cuts. And for rural areas, I think that is a huge amount of money. It's not easily absorbed as it is in Northern Virginia and Richmond and Tidewater. And I think Delegate Ware is absolutely right. People expect results. You know, as the youngest member in the General Assembly at 26, one of the things that attracted me to Richmond and state government was the fact that regardless of party affiliations, for the most part, we have gotten things done in Richmond, as far as I can see and remember. And I think people miss that. Our friends north of the Potomac don't seem to understand that every now and then, but for the most part, we get along and we work together. I think my biggest takeaway from my first session last year it was not partisan differences that I saw as the biggest impediment to progress. It was regional differences, regional disparity. It was Southwest Virginia versus Northern Virginia and other parts of the Commonwealth.
So it's going to be an interesting session, challenging in that short time. And as you alluded to, and we'll make sure our viewers know, last year you dealt with the budget in a special session, right. but for years now, in the off year, the budget's back up again. Right. And
well, historically, the purpose for the short session is to work the budget, and it's grown into more of a short, long session with full-up consideration. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but it's going to be very interesting. And Delegate Yost is correct. The way we operate in Virginia, we have the single object rule. We don't earmark. We have to balance the budget. First, we come to an agreement on the expected revenue, and then we act like grown-up men and women, and we get down and do our business and get it done, and go back home and go to work.
Yes, part-time citizen legislature. And again, the session is designed to be a short one. 46 days scheduled, convening on January 9th. Now, do you men have all your bills lined up, or this is about the time that sometimes your constituents come to you and come to you and to their own delegates and senators and saying, would you consider putting in this bill? So are they coming to you now here in this month?
Well, they have been, and it's accelerating, I'm sure, Onzlee.
Yeah, they have. What one good thing about the short session is we're limited to the number of bills we can file. I believe it's 15, and that's plenty of bills. Each year, the number of bills are approximately the same, 3,500, but we always only for, I don't know why this magical number, you end up getting the same amount that passed. So it's a lot of work and a lot of good bills, and you're right, constituents do drive a lot of bills. But as being on appropriations, I try to caution and remind my constituents that every good idea costs. And so I try to at least let them understand that the idea is a great idea, but how do we pay for it? And Charles and I wrestle with that often on appropriations.
Years ago, there was a delegate from the southwest part of the state, Chip Woodrum, who really pushed when there was a Democratic majority in the House of saying matters that are going to cost something need to go to the Appropriations Committee. And around the Capitol, you still hear people say, well, that's the Woodrum Amendment or something. So it goes back a long time of saying that, because there was a time that things were passed and the cost was not calculated out.
Right. Wow, no, we don't do business that way anymore, and it really does put a load on Onzlee and the other members of the appropriations, because any bill that has a fiscal impact at all, regardless of the subject, not just preparing the budget, you know, we have to go through that.
And there are many bills that I like personally, but our job on appropriations is to figure out the fiscal impact, and if you can't pay for it, the bill shouldn't be written into law.
That's probably something that you picked up on in your first session.
There was many bills of mine that would refer to the ninth floor. Even though they passed out of committee, they would be passed and referred to appropriations. So,
so you got the message by experience. You certainly do. Now, we've just had an election, but as our viewers should know, next year's an election for all members of the House of Delegates. So it's that off year, and so that makes 2013 perhaps extra challenging for you all to know that in doing your other work and earning your living, also that if you're planning to run again, you're welcome to announce now, if you're planning to run again, that then you have to be doing the things you do to try to be on the ballot.
Well, you know, the House of Delegates is similar to Congress. I mean, 2 years go so quickly. I prefer it that way because, you know, you're always consistently working. Not that the Senate doesn't, but they at least get 4 years, and then federal, I believe it's 6. And so you do have some opportunity there to take a breather. We don't. After the first election, the federal election is over, I think myself, including these guys, we're thinking about next year's election, and you have to. So.
Before our time would get by, and it runs so quickly, Joseph, let's go back to you. Some other issue that you'd like perhaps to mention, or something you'd like to tell our viewers?
Well, you know, it's been very interesting being the youngest member in the General Assembly, but it's something that I've greatly enjoyed, particularly representing this area. In addition to, you know, being attracted to Richmond, you know, I was born and raised over in Giles County. I've spent my entire life in my district in education and working. And it's been a very humbling experience to be in the oldest legislative body in the Western Hemisphere. And I look forward to returning to Richmond in January and continuing some of the good things we've got going on. We've got some great ideas coming up through legislation that I think will help some of the local governments in our area and try to find ways to unburden them with some stuff. But you know, at the end of the day, I think we all have to work together. So,
Onzlee, closing word from you?
Well, just basically, I think these guys said it all. It's more regional than partisan politics. I mean, Joseph and I and Charles, we talk regularly about Southwest Virginia. And, you know, I'm the sole Democrat for many, many miles, but we really do get along, and we understand that the importance is not the party, but the importance of the people when we come back home. What do we get done for them?
Charles?
Honestly, he's exactly correct. I received a comment the other day that I spend too much, from someone in Roanoke, that I spend too much time in Roanoke. Well, but not so. I mean, we're all tied together as a region, and we work that way, and people need to know it. I think one of the things that we have to be very careful of this year is the health care issues that come before us. Over the last 5-7 years, the percentage of the state budget dedicated to health and human resources has increased from 13 to about 31 or 32%. That's really putting pressure on every other aspect of the state government, and the health care bill is clearly going to cost money. Now, whether we go and expand the Medicaid, and the Medicaid expansion, I rather doubt it, because it looks like that's going to end up in court now, that the federal, you know, we just can't do some of those things. The language is not in the federal bill. So it's going to be very tough for us, because we recognize a lot of the needs.
Thank you three all very much for being on This Week in Richmond, and look forward in 2013 having a conversation with you at the state capitol.
Oh, looking forward to it.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome two senators, Senator John Edwards, Senator Phillip Puckett, to have some discussion with each other and with our viewers about what you are seeing as some of the biggest opportunities and challenges coming up in the 2013 session. John, let's start with you, and then you and Phil go back and forth. I'll interject myself as needed.
Well, as everybody knows, the president was reelected, and the Obamacare is going to be on the front burner, I think, here in Richmond this winter, because the states have to do several things. And I noticed that the governor just came out the other day and says he's going to default to the federal government when it comes to establishing an exchange where citizens can go online and pick and choose their health insurance plan and design a plan that would fit their needs. It's a quintessential consumer-friendly idea of having an exchange. We should have had one before. We didn't need Obamacare to have it, but now we have to have it in order to comply with federal law, or the federal government's going to impose their own plan. which wouldn't necessarily be bad, but I would think Virginia could do its own plan, and that would be better. So I think the governor's idea of defaulting is really an unwise idea. I think the first thing on the agenda should be to go ahead and pass an exchange. We've been working on it last winter. The Senate was prepared to go ahead and pass one, but the House said, no, let's wait and see what happens with the election. Well, we've had the election. Let's go forward with the exchange. The second part of what the states have to do with regard to what is known as Obamacare is to expand Medicaid. We don't have to. The Supreme Court says you're not mandated to do that. But here's the thing. Obamacare says let's go ahead and expand Medicaid to cover all citizens whose income is less than 133% of the federal poverty level. That would add about 420 new citizens to the Medicaid program. And the federal government—
427,000?
I'm sorry, 437,000 new citizens to the Medicaid program, about 50% more than are already on Medicaid. And the federal government further says if you do that, the federal government would cover 100% of those added costs. We're talking about billions of dollars coming to Virginia, and those dollars would go to healthcare providers, hospitals, nursing homes, dentists, other healthcare providers, primary care providers, to not only provide access to healthcare to those who are at the lower end of the poverty level, below 133% of poverty, but also would pay. That's an unusual thing. Actually pay the providers for it, so that providers would not be given uncompensated care. They would get paid. And this is billions of dollars of money that would come to Virginia. And I understand the Republicans are talking about not doing that. I think it'd be unwise, very unwise, for Virginia not to go forward with expanding Medicaid, not only to cover the poor more and more of those who are not being covered now, but also to make sure the healthcare providers are getting paid. And these are billions of dollars that would come to Virginia and would help our economy as well. So I do not understand the idea of people saying, well, we shouldn't participate by expanding the Medicaid program, because I think it'd be penny wise and pound foolish if we did that.
Phil, what are you seeing?
Well, John, David, in the Southwest, 38th Central District particularly, it's critically important. We have a large number of people who are don't have any insurance at all. We have a lot that are underinsured in some way. So I would agree with John. It seems to me like there's some pluses here that help a lot of people. Certainly help from a standpoint of being able to have access to health care, and the federal government has a commitment to pay for that if we're willing to do it. I understand the governor said that's one of the reasons he was defaulting. He didn't want to do that. I'm not sure I understand why he would not want to do that. A program that would help provide health care to a lot of people, and certainly, as John has already indicated, would bring a tremendous amount of federal dollars to Virginia, and I think it's kind of a win-win situation. And to sort of take the position that we don't have to do anything now, it's a little bit insensitive, I think, to the issue that we're facing. And we have a huge issue with health care, not just in Virginia, but all across this country. And I would say the issue of whether you want to try to help people with one of the most, I think, basic rights a person has is to health care, affordable health care, and this is a way to do it. And, some people think it's not a right, but in the most industrialized nation in the world, to say that we can't provide this for our people, I have trouble understanding that.
You had mentioned before we went on the air that a transportation problem in arriving here, and transportation is perceived to be, and no doubt is, a problem throughout much of the Commonwealth. Do you see anything happening on transportation in this short session coming up?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm kind of doubtful. The Secretary of Transportation, Sean Connaughton, announced a year ago that Virginia's going to run out of construction money by 2017. That's coming up pretty quickly. And that's because the money has to go to maintenance first and then to construction. And if we don't have any money to build new roads after 2017, we're in deep trouble. What the governor has been doing is pushing these Public-Private Transportation Act programs, some of which can work well. The problem with that is you have tolls. So you're going to pay for it one way or the other, either tolls or gas tax, and a third of the people who pay the gas tax are out-of-staters. I think most people, when given that choice, do you want tolls or a little increase in the gas tax, would much prefer the gas tax. And I think the governor has simply got to bite the bullet on this, and I think Virginians are ready to go forward and say, let's make sure that those third that ride on our roads, that tear up our roads, the out-of-staters, let's make them or have them be given the privilege of helping to pay for our roads with an increase in the gas tax. We haven't raised it since 1986, and I think it's something that we can have to do. Otherwise, there'll be tolls, 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 and the fact is our roads will not improve any. We've simply got to do something about transportation. We've put it off and put it off. Something really has to be done.
What about energy issues? I know much of that's federal, but there are also some energy issues that come before you as a state legislature, kind of turning your way, Phil, coming from the coal fields. I mean, what do you see that might take place there?
Well, certainly coal has been on the front burner here in the recent election, particularly in the Southwest, and coal produces about 42 or 3% of the generating capacity across this country, and in Virginia it may be a little more than that. It's an economic engine that certainly drives the Southwest. I represent all the coal field counties with the exception of a little piece of Lee County that I don't have, but it's very important to Southwest Virginia. It's important to Virginia. What you really need to do is take a look at the Port of Virginia. And by the way, we've got some issues with the Port of Virginia we're going to have to deal with, looks like. But I was down there last spring in April, and it's amazing to me the coal that moves through the port. The day we were there, 13 ships sitting out in the Chesapeake Bay area. They're waiting to load. So that has changed a little bit. Part of the issue we're dealing with in the coal, the global market is down a little bit. Most of our metallurgical coal went to China and India and South America, and that has changed. So we have some issues with the energy, particularly in our region, and we're hoping that the global economy itself will pick up a little bit. Fortunately, it looks to me like across our country, I just heard this morning, wholesale figures are up quite a bit, which means that businesses are actually buying things to stock up to send to wherever they're going to sell them. But so that's an indication it's up, even from the last month's figures. And so I think the country is moving forward. It's not moving as forward as quickly as we'd like to, and certainly the issue of putting people to work is a key issue. That brings me back to the coal. It has to be a part of what we do in Southwest Virginia. They're the best paying jobs we have. So we've got to find a balance there where coal and the other energy needs that are out there, and gas is another piece, natural gas and coal bed methane gas, not what you get out of the pump, but those are very critical to the economy in the Southwest, so it's critical to the nation. I have yet to find anyone who can tell me, how you replace 42% of the production, and I think all of us would agree the quickest way to do it is probably put you a nuclear plant up, but no one wants those either. So
not in my backyard. So.
Yeah, not in my backyard. I would say real quick, we have a great example of the new Dominion plant in Wise County. Yeah. It's a very clean coal plant, and I think it's the model for future opportunities of producing coal-fired generation, and we're excited to have it out there.
John, we've got just another minute or so, but what's another issue that you want to tell our viewers about?
Well, this most recent election, people had to stand in lines an awful long time, 2 and 3 and 4 hours and even more. I understand the governor stood in line for an hour and 15 minutes or so. Here in Roanoke, some of the polling places didn't close till maybe 3 hours after. I think one closed 9:45, maybe 10 o'clock or so after the 7 o'clock closing deadline. And we need to do something about that. It's really inexcusable for citizens to have to stand in line that long in order to exercise a basic right to vote. Now, last year and the last couple of years, we've had no excuse voting bills. Senator Janet Howell, who used to be chair of the Senate Public Privileges and Elections Committee, has had these bills, and on a straight party line vote, they've been defeated. This past winter, for example, was defeated on a straight party line vote. We need to do what some other states are doing, like early voting and other ways to make it easier for people to exercise the right to vote. So this is something I think we need to take up. There was a problem 4 years ago. People said we got to do something about it. Not much has been done. So we got to make it easier for people to vote.
Well, there's been some news out that people in both parties, particularly in your chamber, are looking at that. So if folks are interested in that, if they are for it or if they're against it, they should be talking with their senators and their delegates, because that's something that you will have on the...
Well, this apparently is a national problem. And it's not just every 4 years when we have the presidential election, but you know, it ought to be easy to vote.
Thank you both for being on This Week in Richmond, and when the session is underway, we'll find a time to have conversation with you there at the Capitol.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, promoting the free enterprise system to enhance economic competitiveness. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.